Honourable Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few months, we've supported many of the economic measures announced by the government, but the decision last week not to provide sector-specific support to those most at risk could end up costing thousands of jobs. One of the sectors, aviation, has already seen huge redundancies. BA have announced 12,000 redundancies, Virgin 3,000, EasyJet 1,900. If the government's priority really is to protect jobs, why did the Chancellor not bring forward sector-specific deals that could have done precisely that?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one should underestimate the scale of the challenge that this country faces, and that is why the Chancellor has brought forward a range of measures, which, by the way, he supported last week, Mr. Speaker, the job retention bonus, the Kickstarter programme for young people, and we are also doing a huge amount to support the aviation sector. And one of the companies that he mentions, Virgin, has now come out of the Birch process after extremely difficult, but in the end, productive conversations. That's the work of this government, getting on, helping companies through it, helping our people through it. And I may say to Mr. Speaker, he has to work out whether he's going to support or oppose the government's programme to get people back into work. Last week, the shadow Chancellor said here in this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, that she supported our programme. This week, he says he opposes it. Which is it?
Keir Starmer.
This is just such rhetorical nonsense. It is perfectly proper and right for the opposition to set out the parts of the package that we support of the government and to highlight where there are problems. And the problem with the Prime Minister's dismissal of this is that since the Chancellor sat down last week, around 10,000 people have lost their jobs. The Prime Minister should focus on them, not the rhetoric. And the OBR yesterday projected 3.5 million unemployed next year. I want to press the Prime Minister further on the situation at BA, a huge employer and the national flag carrier. Alongside the 12,000 redundancies already announced, BA is trying to force through the rehiring of the remaining 30,000 workers on worse terms and conditions. That's totally unacceptable, and it's a warning shot to millions of other working people. The Prime Minister sent an email to BA staff in which he said, "I've already made it clear that firms should not be using furlough to cynically keep people on their books and then remove them or change their terms and conditions." That was the 2nd of June. It's now 6 weeks on. Will the Prime Minister now personally intervene and make clear that actions like those at BA cannot be allowed to stand without consequences for landing slots?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely clear that we want our companies, our great companies across this country, to support their workers and to keep them in employment where they possibly can. And I've made that point clear to on the floor of the House just in the last couple of weeks. But let's be absolutely clear. British Airways and many other companies are in severe difficulties at the moment, and we cannot, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, simply with a magic wand ensure that every single job that was being done before the crisis is retained after the crisis. What we can do, and what we are doing, is encouraging companies to keep their workers on with the job retention scheme, with the job retention bonus, and with a massive programme in investment in this country, a £600 billion investment programme in this country to build, and create jobs. And that is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's the rehiring 30,000 people at BA on worse terms and conditions, and he should call it out. Yesterday, the government's expert advisory group published a report on the challenges this autumn and winter. They were asked to do so by the government's Office for Science. That report assessed the reasonable worst-case scenario for this autumn and winter, including a second COVID spike and seasonal flu, and it set out strong recommended actions to mitigate the risks. The report was clear. July and August must be a period of intense preparation, i.e. now. Can the Prime Minister make clear that he intends to implement the recommended actions in this report in full and at speed?
Mr. Speaker, not only are we getting on with implementing the preparations for a potential new spike, but he will know that the government is engaged in record investments in the NHS, £34 billion. What I think the House may not realise is just in the last year since this government has been in office, there are now 12,000 more nurses in the NHS, 6,000 more doctors, and it was thanks to their hard work, thanks to the hard work of the entire NHS, that we were able to prevent our health service from being overwhelmed this spring, and we will take steps to ensure that it is not overwhelmed this winter as well.
Starmer.
That's the whole point of this report. It sets out the reasonable worst-case scenario and tells the government what it needs to do about it. So I'm surprised he's not committing to fully implement it. It's vital that the government learns the lessons from the mistakes that have been made and acts now to save lives for the future. One of the key recommendations in this report, commissioned by the Government's Office for Science, is that testing and tracing capacity will need to be significantly expanded to cope with increased demands over the winter. The reality is this: Trace and Track is not working as promised as it stands today. The report makes clear it needs to be significantly expanded to cope with the risks of autumn and winter. What assurance can the Prime Minister give that the system will be fit for both purposes in the timeframe envisaged in this report, i.e. by this September?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again he attacks the test and trace operation, which is working at absolutely unprecedented scale, and 144,000 people across the country, have now agreed to self-isolate to stop the spread of the virus. And he keeps saying that the test and trace operation is failing to contact enough people, or failing to get enough people to self-isolate. Actually, they are doing fantastic work. 70% or 80% of the contacts are found, and they are getting through to the vast majority of people who have the disease. And I can certainly give the House the assurance that our test and trace system is as good as or better than any other system anywhere in the world. And yes, it will play a vital part in ensuring that we do not have a second spike this winter. And what I think he should do, instead of knocking the confidence of the country in the test and trace system, now is the time for him to return to his previous script and build it up. That's what he needs to do.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the problem with the Prime Minister quoting the 70% of people who are contacted and asked to self-isolate is that's gone down. It was 90% just a few weeks ago, and every week it's gone down. So I wouldn't quote the latest figure, looking at the trend. But I have to ask, in light of the last few questions, has the Prime Minister actually read this report that sets out the reasonable worst-case scenario and tells the government what it needs to do about it in the next 6 weeks? Has he read it?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'm of course aware of the report, and we are of course taking every reasonable step to prepare this country for a second spike. And I may say to the right honourable gentleman, it is up to him really to get behind what the government is doing or not. And he has previously supported our plan. He's previously come to this House and said that he supports our measures. He now says, I think, that he doesn't support them. I think what he needs to do is build up the confidence of the people of this country, cautiously to get back to work, cautiously to restart our economy, which is what we are trying to do, instead of endlessly knocking the confidence of the people of this country, knocking their confidence in test and trace, knocking their confidence in our schools and the safety of our schools, and knocking our confidence in our transport network. Now is the time for him to decide whether he backs the government or not.
Keir Starmer.
It is perfectly possible to support track and trace and point out the problems. And standing up every week saying it's a stunning success is kidding no one. That isn't giving people confidence in the system. They would like a Prime Minister who stands up and says, there are problems, and this is what I'm going to do about them. Not this rhetoric about stunning success when it's obviously not true. Finally, this afternoon, Prime Minister, I'm meeting the families of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group, a group of hundreds of families who've lost loved ones. They say this, and I quote, "We won't let the deaths of our loved ones be in vain, and we won't allow the government to risk a second wave of deaths without learning from their mistakes." They will be listening to the Prime Minister's answers today. So what would the Prime Minister like to say to them?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I join with, I think, every member of the House in mourning the loss of everybody who has died in this epidemic. And I can assure him and through him the victims and their families that we will do absolutely everything in our power to prevent a second spike in this epidemic. And that's why we're taking the steps that we are. That's why we've set up, as I say, an unprecedented test and trace operation. That's why we are investing massively in our NHS, in our frontline staff, and as I say, in the last year, recruiting 12,000 more nurses as part of a programme to recruit 50,000 more, preparing our NHS for winter. We will do absolutely everything we can to protect our country and to stop a second spike. But what he has to decide is whether he wants to back that programme or not. Because one day he says it's safe to go back to school. The next day he's taking the line of the unions. One day they're supporting our economic programme. The next day they're saying our stamp duty cut is an unacceptable bung. One day they're saying they accept the result of the Brexit referendum. The next day, today, they're going to tell their troops to do the exact opposite. He needs to make up his mind which brief he's going to take today. Because at the moment, Mr. Speaker, it looks he's got more briefs than Calvin Klein. We're getting on with delivering on our agenda for the country, getting this country through this pandemic and taking it forward.
Can I just say to the Prime Minister as well, we are going to work through the chair. We're not, the audience isn't that way, it's this way. Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency is home to many farms.
We will make America great again.